Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Rob Fnuff.
And I'm Matt Croger. Welcome to our episode on building a special character for an event. I thought it was timely, given Rob's got his upcoming event of Kings of Memphis with, his special bard characters, which often get a lot of love. It's certainly a sizable thing in America to build special characters for an event. And I think it's something that the American tournaments do really well. We've had a couple of tournaments in Australia where they have that, and I'm not so sure about the UK. So let us know how common that is in the UK. But I thought, a good time and to have a discussion about how would you go about it if you were looking to do it. But before we get into that, Rob, new job for you. Nose to the grindstone. Have you been able to achieve any hobby?
Not really, no. I started a new job. I was working on a special project that was like a compliance project, so it was fully remote, and my team was fully remote, and most of them didn't even live in the same city. And I've now transitioned into a packaging process engineering manager role, which means production support, which means we're on the shop floor. So that means, it's a totally different animal. So the last 2 weeks I've been working at the facility for 4 out of 5 days, which is a complete culture shock for me, right? Because I used to run to the grocery store, go get gas, or go to the garage and paint a model. I'm not doing any of that because I'm,
put out 3 episodes a week.
Correct. So it's definitely taken a hit. I think ultimately I will learn the work-life balance and get things rolling. But it's a new team, right? And you're taking over a new team, and you're trying to learn personalities. How about you, Matt? What have you been up to?
A little bit the same. We have officially committed to doing a new business, so I've been getting a lot happening in that regard. So that takes up a lot of time. But I have been doing a bit of hobby, working on my Nagaris right as we speak. So I've got a regiment of those going, and almost finished a couple of hordes of berserkers. So that'll be done, and then for an ambush tournament coming up in a month. I think that means I'll only have a Heliquin to go. So that's awesome. That'll be good. Broken the back of, probably 1,000 to 1,500 points of the Abyssals.
Yeah, ironically, I am hobbying today. My buddy Andy came over, and I'm helping him with a display board and getting basing around. And so he is actually downstairs. I gave him a list of tasks while I was gone. You got to do this, this, and this. Right. So he's airbrushing some buildings, and so it's been fun. And I've almost got my champions complete. So that's cool. I've got to finish the horse, and I've got to finish the character. Everything else is done. And I've been getting into Halo lately. So I've started to paint the Halo Spartans. And then I also painted the upgraded plastic scatter terrain set. And it's cool because I did it in the blue tone that matches the blue neoprene mat that I bought. And so I am getting some hobby done, just not to the excessive amount that I'm used to getting. Right? Because I don't know about you, Matt. When I get home at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, I sit down, and then by 8 o'clock, I'm falling asleep in my chair, and my dog's up at 4:30 to get me up to get the day going again. So it's a whirlwind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite similar actually at the moment.
Yeah.
But at least there's a little bit of hobby in both our lives. I mean, you've got a massive hobby day, and then you're going almost not back to back, but a small gap, and then you've got the Green Lady review.
Correct. Yeah. So we started at 9. We stopped to pause to do this. We're going to go back for a couple hours, and then we're going to do the Green Lady review. And fortunately, it took us a long time. Apologies for the delay, but it just took us a while to get schedules lined up. But we're going to be joined by Luke Schaefer from your neck of the woods. Well, it's Australia. It's not really your neck of the woods. And Marcelo from the East Coast, from the Philly area. I think they're very good Order of the Green Lady players. So I think they have a lot of knowledge to share. And both have had recent list builders, right? Within the last 6 months for sure.
Yeah, more isn't always better. So I think having those two very I was going to say very competitive, but not in a negative sense.
No, they're very, yeah, they are competitive in the sense that they're there to win, right? And I think they'll be able to share some of that, and as you say, having 2 versus 5, sometimes when you have 4 or 5 voices, it's like, well, we're really just being redundant. We're saying the same thing. So I think distilling it down to 2, and hopefully people have listened to the latest Lore Master Library. It was a concerted effort to do the same thing on that. We were having 4 or 5 guests plus the author. It was, 4 or 5 hour recording session. And I don't know that it was adding additional value. So this last one was like maybe 3 hours with just, Nathan and Mark Barber and Kenny Law. And the product was just as good, if not better. So I'm excited.
Yeah. I think sometimes with the audio too, you do lose a feel of who's who anyway, when you've got too many voices. So it can be a bit of a track, particularly if you don't know the people directly. It can be easy to lose track. Although I'll say, Rob, Marcelo used to be one of us, so you are biasing the Aussies for the Green Lady.
Yeah, for sure. He's an interesting character. Obviously, I think he's Argentinian background. Spent a lot of time in Australia. Now he's in the U.S. He is an international man of mystery, but there's no mystery in his filth. He puts the filth out front.
Well, I'm looking forward to listening to that episode, and I still do have the crew who will do the Lega Audio review, but it's just that's all my problem now.
What's the over under if I have to do the ogre review because Jeremy?
The ogre review, the over. Yeah.
What's the over?
I reckon there's a good chance of that. I'll definitely get the Lega Audio one done. It's just pull my finger out and schedule it. And so with that. Let's roll into some announcements, mate. One thing that we've been talking a lot about recently is building our diversity of content. Those of you that subscribe to the YouTube channel will have noticed that we've put a couple of videos out recently. A couple of months ago, we got out an unboxing video, and no one's really been doing unboxing videos for Mantic stuff. So that was the ultimate kit, the all-in kit for the champion set. We did that, and then more recently, you and I did an episode on paintbrush care. So check those out if you haven't already. What we're looking to do is, like I said, build that diversity of content. So we would love people. I think we might do something a bit more formal, and we'll put some written directions out, and we'll have a bit more of a show of it. But we want people to think about, would they want to contribute to the show through some content? And I think particularly on that hobby side, Rob, is that how you'd put it?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's personally, I would love to start doing more YouTube videos that are like how-tos, tutorials, that kind of thing. Because, we did that episode about paintbrushes and how you clean them and the tools that you go with that. It's like, I can show them the paintbrush, but it was really more of a discussion on how to do things rather than to show you how to do things. And so I think there's some opportunity there. And obviously we'd love to do terrain videos. In fact, I've got a couple things lined up. One of the ideas I have is to maybe do a series on terrain where we take each episode is a different type of terrain. So maybe we do one on hills, one on woods, and show people the different kinds of ways you can do hills or woods or blocking terrain, etc. And show them the specific considerations, because it's a delicate balance between really aesthetically pleasing terrain, but yet playable and functional terrain, right? Like, you want terrain that functions well for Kings of War, that it doesn't impede the game, right? But at the same time, personally, I don't like to play on 2D terrain, right? I don't want to have like paper cutouts or pieces of felt. I want something there, something tangible that my army can, sit on and work their way through. So yeah, lots of great ideas. And I think on that end, Matt, we will put out an episode in the near future, maybe a deep dive into the show, solicit some potential new contributors. We'll kind of talk about what that kind of commitment would look like, and give a little background, sort of a deep dive into the behind the scenes of the show. Matt, we get questions like that all the time. They're like, well, what Kings of War podcast should I listen to besides yours? And unfortunately, my answer is I don't really listen to Kings of War podcast. We're putting out so much content that I don't have time. However, that being said, I do listen to Direct Misfire and Unplugged Radio primarily because they're doing something different than we do. They have a different take or a different spin, which I enjoy. No offense to anybody else. I just don't really have time to listen to the same type of content that we're already putting out, right? Because it's redundant.
I totally agree with you. I barely listen to ours sometimes, Well, obviously we're quality controlling
our own episodes, so we might listen to it 2 or 3 times by the time, once to record, once to edit, and once to QC. I think, Matt, what we should probably do is, maybe tied to this episode dropping, we will put a post up just having people ask questions about the show, more on the behind the scenes questions, how we get our topics, how we select our guests, how we arrange our show, how do you edit the show, what tools are you using, what software, that kind of thing. Yeah. Those that may not remember, many of the shows that are out there started as contributors to our show, right? Like Unplugged Radio started with Jake Charapica, like, gosh, I'm going to say 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, a long time, and we're happy to do that too. And that's maybe we can include that in the show as well is, if you are interested in starting your own show, we would love to help you do that, especially if you're interested in finding your own creative space in our community. I mean, that's the dream, right? Like you have a unique way to tackle it. The Mantic Lore podcast, I think is what it's called, right? Those guys are great. They're really talking about the Warpath universe from the lore perspective. And that's another one that I do listen to. Let's take our first commercial break. And then on the other side, we'll get into our main topic, event special characters. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Mike Rossi, fourth mic on the Unplugged Radio podcast, Dash 28 contributor, giant nobody, Oscar the Grouch lookalike, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. And so, like I said, a very timely episode, given Rob, you've been creating your yearly characters, which change a little bit year on year. We weren't seeing it much in Australia. I delved into this probably first 2 years ago for our version of Best of the Rest at the Masters, where I had special characters created based on previous Masters winners. And, and so I thought it might be a fun topic to look into. And I think we've just got a number of discussion points around them that we're just going to talk about off the cuff, and we'll give examples from probably mostly those two scenarios. But it's certainly something, like I mentioned in the intro, seems to be much bigger in the America, which I think ties into our first discussion point, which is really if you're wanting to do something like this, you got to really think about what's your goal of having the character in the first place. Is it to increase the theme of your event? So, Rob, yours is tied into the theme of the Kings of Memphis. There's the samurai character at the
Samurai Showdown.
Yeah,
Samurai. You got the lone wolf, that lone wolf, right? Yeah.
There's also what's the tournament that does the kaiju monster?
King of the Monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, King of the Monsters. So does it tie into the theme of the event? Is it something that's completely random that you've just decided you don't want to do something too vanilla and chuck something in there? How is it relevant is part of that conversation. So, Rob, you obviously do it for Kings of Memphis with the bards. What made you think, rather than theme other stuff too much in the event, that I'm going to have a special character?
If we go back to when I was running the Blue City Brawl, I don't know, 8-9 years ago, we had the king. The players would bring a king model, right? And we live in Memphis, home of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. So that was the kind of the thing, right? Like, hey guys, we're sort of leaning into Memphis. Move forward. I don't run the Blue City Brawl anymore. I run Kings of Memphis. I didn't want to just port over the king because I had already done that. But I thought there was a way to continue that connection to the Memphis history on the music side, and maybe even go farther. So for us, we then transitioned into the bard. Obviously, we wanted a musical influence, right? And bard is the obvious class to pick up on that, right? And I think when we started, we might only had one or two versions. It's changed a lot over the years. We'll get into some of those things that you can make mistakes on, which is, if you break the rules too much, then you end up with more questions than it's worth. Over the years, we've sort of simplified things a little bit. But in terms of the bard for the Kings of Memphis event, the way we have really made it immersive to what we were trying to say with the event in Memphis as a whole is, essentially we have three bards. They sort of have three different roles. We have the Troubadour of Tempo, which is all about movement. And then we have one called the Minstrel of Mail, which is really about being defensive. And then kind of the fighty guy is the Balladeer of Battle. And each of them have their own selection of spells, and they all have an aura very similar to Gastromancy, where you do have to roll, the dice and get 1/4, just like with Gastromancy. And the way we do it is each of them have 2 to 3 spells, and they all have 3 auras, and you can attempt to sing one aura per turn, and you can only sing or attempt to sing each aura once per game, right? So if you have a 6-turn game, you could potentially use all 3 of your auras. However, it's like gastromancy. So if you don't get a 4, then it's not going off. And I enjoy clever wordplay. The Minstrel Male has, the kill is gone, right? Which is an aura for stealthy. Now, obviously, the thrill is gone is what we're playing on there, right? The BB King song, the blues standard. Then we have that same board has Ring of Quagmire is an aura for Phalanx, and it's playing on Ring of Fire. And then we have Great Walls of Abishire. That's a double one there because it's calling back to the banner, the Abishire banner, right? That used to give us Spell Ward. This aura gives them Spell Ward, but it's obviously calling back to Jerry Lee Lewis with Great Balls of Fire. So it's funny because the people that are really invested and take the time to look at it and really think about it, they're like, oh, I get it. Like, that's funny, And we do from time to time. You mentioned they evolve, right? So we have 3 bards, and the way it'll work is the one that's the most popular will get the Nerf bat next year. And right now, it looks like it's going to be the Balladeer to Battle. We might have went a little too overboard with him. He's got an aura for Strider, right? Which is pretty good, but then he's also got Bane Chant too. He's almost too good because he's giving you too much stuff, which is why, about half the field right now have selected him.
Yeah, and I think so. Overall, I think the characters work best when they are improving that theme of the event, don't they? That, and I think it just. I mean, I do know there's certainly one person in Australia that doesn't love a special character, but I think a lot of people do enjoy them, and as an opportunity for creativity too, particularly if they've given enough notice. Yeah, playing into the theme of the event just makes it fun. So, for example, like I said, with what we call Rising, the tournament, which is the best of the rest, I thought, if we're going to have people playing on the side of the Masters, and how do we tie it to the Masters a little bit better, but also bring in something that's a little bit fun. And so they've continued the special characters since after that first year when I was running it. But and in that, I also had a piece of terrain as part of it called the Master's Pleasure Palace. So one of the pieces of blocking terrain was always a Master's Pleasure Palace where they were residing. But I liked to play on perhaps some things that tied to the actual Master from the previous year before. So, Jeff was easy to pick on, and we had Sensei Jeff, and so we had one of his special rules was Curse of Years, and so Jeff was only speed 5 because we said due to his advanced age he was a bit slower than the other characters, but then to improve it on the other hand, he was Master Technician, so he had that redeployment special rule basically where he could redeploy D3 plus 1 units. So you can do a bit of giveth and taketh away, right, with a character. And I think creating theme around the characters is quite nice as well.
One of the interesting things that you just mentioned, though, is that as you described your event, you guys didn't have special scenarios. You didn't have a lot of other stuff that's out of the ordinary. And that's the same with Kings of Memphis. That's why I feel comfortable giving them a bard. There's this one thing that we're giving you in terms of the experience that's outside of the box, in terms of not in the book. But if I was giving all custom scenarios, maybe that would be a bridge too far for me. And I would want to recomplicate the game additionally complicate the game over that by giving them a special character. If I've already done, tweak the game in other ways.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point because the more you tweak, the more it is you are likely to get something wrong as well with balance of everything. So not just the complication, but did I think about how this interacts with this and what army does that interact too well with? It can get a little out of control.
It can. The trick for us is that we just show it to Tom Annis and Travis Dim, and they will show us that where we have went wrong.
Yeah, and similarly, these first characters were shown to Luke Schaefer.
And he said, "I will take this one," and he will explain why. And you're like, "Oh,
so
that's not a good
a fair bit of feedback." So having someone that is that's another good point, Rob. If you've got someone who is a very good tournament player and loves to think about the game, having someone to run your characters by is a very good option. What you were saying about the bards also plays into point 2, which was one of the reasons I also wanted multiple special characters for the Rising event, is that thinking about whether you have a single character or options, and what are the positives and negatives of each. For me, one of the negatives of having a single character is that you're more likely to bias a couple of different armies, because you're not going to give them special rules in all domains. Whereas when you have this something that they can pick from, and like you've done, that they have different spreads of special rules, then you're more likely to be able to cover, most armies will get a buff in some way, and you're less likely, I think, to kind of overbuff something.
100%. And when I go back to the way we ran the Kings at BCB, we only had one option, and we made it very vanilla. If you went too crazy, it might help one army versus better than another. And so with that one, basically they were inspiring. They were still an individual, and they had score unit strength. Like, it was very limited and you would use them within the scenario. In a way, while they can make a model that looks like the king of rock and roll or whatever else they want to do to tie it to their army, it didn't really have any impact, right? It didn't make you think about your army or, that kind of thing. So when we only had one character, it's sort of like, well, I get this for free and I'll just put it in there, but maybe they're not invested. Like, whereas we have these three, a lot of the players take the time to look through what the options on the menu are. And they go, oh, that looks pretty good. So the troubadour of tempo, he has hacks, surge, and wind blast, because it's all about movement, right? Surge. Right. So there's some armies that like, wow, I would love to have an extra version of surge, another source of surge. And then his auras are a pathfinder, a wild charge +1, and a nimble. Very unique, but it's all movement based. And so there are certainly some armies. And we talked about you might go too far. Well, back in the day, it wasn't wild charge +1, it was +1 speed. It was not good. So we learn our lessons too. Like, it's not perfect, right? So sometimes you swing too far.
Well, and I think having that selection also plays into the more and less competitive players. So, yeah, like you said, Rob, the more competitive players might look at all the options and go, oh, what's really the best character? And then I'll pick an army to pick the best character, to go best with the best character. Whereas having that selection also plays into the people who go, oh, I really want to play my salamanders, so let's just pick the character that fits or buffs them the best. Yeah. Well,
I think too, it's important to mention that at Kings of Memphis, there's a heavy theme component to your hobby score. So, I mean, it's fine to pick a great army if you already have a great looking army, an assembled army that's painted, right? But like, if you were just going to net list, you will find it more difficult at Kings of Memphis, because you're going to lose a bunch of points about, do the units look like what they're supposed to present to your opponent? We're like every other event. There's at least one or two girls that are going to show up with, the list that they just want to play because it's powerful. But most of the people have invested. And in terms of the Bard too, they're building Bard models on 40 millimeter square bases, right? So last year's winner of Best Bard was Scary Lee Lewis. And it was a giant arachnid playing on a piano, and the piano's being destroyed because it's got eight arms banging on this thing, right? Like, and so, yeah.
That's awesome. Who did that?
That was Andy Patton did it. Yeah, it was great. It was a wonderful model. We've got all kinds, obviously being from Memphis, we do have a lot of folks that do like Memphis-based musician, like we'll have a lot of Elvis-inspired stuff. But another shout-out last year was Keith Randall, who you would never think in a million years is a hobby guy, right? And he'd probably say he's not. But he brought Aerosmith. Arrow, ARROWSMITH, had a concert poster, had basically Steven Tyler and the band. Like, it was totally cool. I was like, oh, that's awesome, right? Cool. Like, that's the kind of stuff that's why we do it, so that they give another opportunity to make a very creative model. We made the choice that these models, they're on 40 millimeter bases. They don't have a lot of usage outside of Kings of Memphis. So there is that too, right? Like, it's not like we're telling you to build an ogre character, right? Or something like that, where like, well, if I have an ogre armory, I can just use it there. Like, these Bard models are not of any use typically, because a lot of times special characters are actually on individual bases, like either a cavalry base or a 20 or 25, and we're on 40. So, because we wanted to give them room to have a drum set if they wanted, right? We have another guy that built an undead character where it's on a stage. It's got lights, and it's just, I mean, it's so creative, some of the stuff they do. So how about you? I mean, what kind of stuff did you see when you ran the special characters at Best of the Rest?
Yeah, we saw some great models. I think what mostly people say these days probably took the closest 3D model they could get, to some sort of theme, and did it. And probably, I think the good thing about yours too is that it's the bards change, but it's bards year after year, so people have this long-term expectation of what they do, and then the hobby element creates its own hobby element as it goes on, right? People see, everyone's getting into it, so everyone else then wants to really get into it. One thing is that people have an option of doing, if they're not wanting to get too creative on their own, is there is the create your own, basically legendary monster type character in the was it the version 3 rule book, or was it one of the clashes after?
I thought it was 3.5 rule book, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was the first Clash of Kings supplement.
Yeah, and it gives some point guidelines. I mean, it's not balanced, but it won't always be anyway. And we've run a tournament like that where people got basically a monster for free, and then we were able to hobby around it, and that was cool as well. But yeah, I think it's best when it gives some people some creativity around it too. I don't think it's as fun when there's kind of like you said, it's going to have a heap of use elsewhere. So yeah, create your own ogre special character.
Right. Yeah, and if you go too far, just the tip here is that once you have a rough idea of what you're thinking about, let people play with them. They will give you feedback and say, hey, I get what you're doing here. This is probably a little too far, or a little too, in the case of us, we started with 2 bards and now we're up to 3. And I don't think we're going to add a 4th bard. I think we're going to stay at 3. And to your point, their general roles are not going to change. You're going to have one that's about movement, one that's about defense, and one that's about offense. Right. But the spells they take, or the spells they have available, or the auras they have, those might change based on, the really popular ones are going to get nerfed just because we want to incentivize taking, some of the ones that aren't seeing the table. Mm-hmm. So, but to that end, you could show it to players and they can give you some feedback on what changes they would like to see, and that's how Surge was added to the Tempo Bard, because, it makes sense, because even if you don't really find the auras that specific bard has, or maybe they're not useful for the army build you have, but if you have a Surge army, that's a compelling reason. It's another Surge 4 source, right? It's a compelling thing. So,
yeah,
plus
100%.
Getting into a guitar duel with another bard and having 9 attacks is phenomenal. It's just fun, seeing them duel off in the middle of the table. Love it.
That's another good point, Rob. I think something when you're building a special character, I think it's nice if you've got this tournament special character to have a way that they will interact with each other. So, so that's not just about how they affect the game, but how do they affect each other, And so, that might not be built into the profile, but that's like a rule that you build around it. So, right. Yeah, do you want to explain what your interaction rule is for the bards?
Yeah, I mean, the first they do have a role in the scenarios. So there we have at Kings of Memphis, we use the countercharge scoring system, which is, it's going to sound crazy, but trust me, it's totally fun and it totally works. We don't have attrition or kill points. We just have 5 levels of scoring the scenario, right? It's a major win, a minor win, a draw, a minor loss, a major loss. And it's what you would think, right? Based on the number of scenario points you capture. But then we also have bonus objectives that are available. And there's 3 of them. And one of them is really designed to make you play the scenario wrong. It's sort of like handicap yourself and you can maybe get that bonus point. Then there's one, could just be something tactical. Maybe we tell you to keep your the unit with your most expensive magical artifact alive, that kind of thing. And then the third one is somehow related to the bard, right? You've got to use this bard in a unique way to earn this point. But to your point, beyond the scenario, we have this ability where, they're not really fighty characters. But if you get into a guitar duel, in other words, you fight another bard, you triple your attacks, it makes you much more hitty. Because these bards do have some impact on the game, there's an incentive to knock that bard out, right? And I should mention, another reason why you'd want to do that is we have the Gastromancy rule, which is if you're disordered, you can't cast auras, right? So we have the same thing. If you're disordered, then or wavered, right? You're not going to cast your spells. So even if you're not going to kill the guy, you get in there and fight him. And these bards are only 11, 13 nerve and defense 4. All 3 bards have that profile is exactly the same. The only difference is what spells they have access to and what auras they have access to. That's the only distinction. So,
yeah, absolutely. And something we didn't directly discuss just then, but we almost alluded to is I think when you're building a special character, considering your meta is something that you probably should do. If you're in an area that, say, already has half a dozen dwarf armies turning up and they're dominating, you don't probably want to create your special character to buffs those just even more and has them stomping all the other players like they might already do. I mean, you could even use it to balance that out if you wanted to. Like if you had a bunch of a certain type of army that had been dominating your scene for a long time, like you could even go the opposite way when you considered your meta and use it to incentivize people to take something else.
So they could take those defense, they could give a weakness, or maybe there's we at one time considered like giving a +1 defense, and exactly what you just said, like in our neck of the woods, we don't really need that. Like it's going to make the oppressive army more oppressive. So we just said, no, that's probably not the right move. And so we decided to go more the route of, for that bard, stealthy, spell ward, phalanx, which has its own unique ways to impact the game, but it's not quite as powerful as +1 defense. So
yeah, and again, I think if you've got a variety of characters, then you're probably a little less likely to get that wrong anyway. So probably you need to consider meta even more if you're just going to go for a single type of character, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. 100% agree with what you just said.
Yeah. And then next, probably the next thing is probably more when we're getting into the next couple of points are really around how do you build the stat profile, right? And so part of this is going to come down to what is your theme for the event. And Rob, you just spoke to it, is basically, they get into a guitar duel, they've basically got an individual's stat line. So what special rules are you going to give them?
Yeah, and these guys basically have duelist against other bards, right? Like that's essentially what they've got. But you bring up a good point that don't deviate too far in terms of the stat line. Don't go crazy. You don't need to make them defense 6, and just crazy bonker stuff. I mean, ours all are the same. They're speed 5. They're melee 3+. They don't have a ranged attack. We don't need any more shooting in the South. That's what we were talking about before. Like, there's plenty of shooting already. We don't need to give them another shooting attack. Some of them have offensive spells. That's fine. They're all defense 4. They're height 2. They're unit strength 1. And they have 3 attacks, 11, 13. They're in there. We treat them as 180 points for some scenarios that might come into play, right? What's interesting, though, is they're height 2. So they're on the size of a base of an ogre, but we give you that extra challenge that you're only height 2. So you've got to like move them in a place where you can see stuff. They also have nimble and stealthy. Again, we're in the South. We have a lot of shooting. So I figured, because they are only speed 5, and that's, you can only move 5 if you're going to do some of the, the spells and whatnot. Figured we give them nimble, and then the stealthy just helps against the shooting. And then that's it. They don't have any other they don't inspire. We used to inspire, but really, I'm like, no, they're not there to inspire you. They're there to, help you in other ways. And then they have the 3 auras and typically 2 to 3 spells. The concern that's always on the back of my mind is, did we go too far? Right. Did you make it too complex? And the bigger thing is, are you breaking base rules? That's going to confuse people. So we used to have them on like 20, 25 bases, but gave them unit strength. And people were like, well, how does this work? Right. They're on this, they're an individual. Right. And then we even moved them to a 40, but we kept the individual special rule. Right. And it's like, eventually we just say, you know what, we're going to treat them like an ogre kind of character, right? Without the height. And it just makes it easier. They don't have to explain they have unit strength. They have unit strength 1, right? It's on their stat profile.
Yeah, well, the individual special rules are a really interesting one, because I think a lot of characters, particularly if they're smaller, feel like they should have it. But then you really need to consider how these things interact with the profile. So you've got to remember that, like, individuals, not just about movement. It becomes harder for other stuff to run into it and take it off, because they won't double and triple their attacks, which means, you probably don't want them to have super high nerve, right? Because then, they can become too impactful in the game, because basically no one can take them off. So you really got to consider how those special rules interact with the profile. And you might have some variety there, but so like for the rising characters, like we did write them as individuals, but but then you consider it by definitely not having the nerve too high. And I mean, the thing that we did differently is that they did vary in their stat profile, right?
Okay.
So you might pick something. So like we did have someone like Sensei Jeff as Def 6, but his nerve was only and dash 12. But then you might take away somewhere else. So he may have less attacks, or I mean, Jeff didn't in this one, but you're going to create some variation in the other special rules if you do fiddle with the stat profiles. So
yeah, I think the trick is that if you have differentiation, like with ours, it's the spells and the auras, just keep it to a minimal amount of changes between the characters. So that way, when you're reviewing them at the end, you're getting feedback, you understand what needs to be fixed for next year, right? Like, so for example, the Validator battle, maybe they're taking this because of, he's got Bane Chant 2 and Lightning Bolt 4, right? And then he's got Strider Fury and Elite Melee auras. That's all I got to worry about. I know it's nothing to do with anything else because they don't have anything. Everything else is the same. So it's got to be something there that's causing them to take this bard over the other two. And what I'm saying is if you limit the areas that you are differentiating between your special characters, it will make understanding the impact it's had on the game and how you can adjust it to improve it going forward.
Yeah, so for example, the guys tweaked them for last year to introduce a new one based on Stephen Devonish. So one character got subbed out and Stephen came in. But basically, all the characters have 5 attacks. They all have individual mighty and inspiring. So you've got the base of a common stat line there. So even if you do create some variation, and then when there was variation, it's basically by a point or two. So, as I'd mentioned, Jeff was speed 5, then there was a Porter Ken one who was speed 6, and then Stephen was speed 7. And that played into the theme of them. And then defense might have only varied by a point. So like create that variety, but probably don't have it wildly variable, as you said, Rob, because, then it becomes much more difficult to kind of figure out what was really the problem with this character.
Well, it's hard to know what dial to turn to either make them a little bit of a nerf or to improve them, right? It's hard to know what to adjust.
And so, and then it's the special rule combos, isn't it, Rob? So
yeah, and then we always get something wrong. Yeah, so like this. So first of all, when we would give bigger bases the individual special rule, well, like, okay, well, they have unit strength, but you have the individual rule that's in conflict, right? This year, fortunately, we've only had one that I had to really address, which is we gave the Minstrel of Mail a Barkskin 4, which is a unique spell, right? So like if somebody has it in their army, the question is, can I take this guy too? And the answer is yes. So we have several armies, mostly Trident Realms, that are rocking 2 Barkskin, which in combination with, I should mention, we're running command dice as well. So they're going to have a lot of Barkskin on the table, potentially. Well, I guess you could put it on Gigas, but Barkskin's harder to get on defense 6, right? So, but like you can put it on your ensnare hordes and stuff. It'd be pretty great. But yeah, over the years, when you do things that break the normal rules, you have to almost have an FAQ, right? And and that's one of the reasons why, like, we used to just give them the auras for free. Like, it's my aura. And what we said was, let's just make it like Gastromancy. It's in the rules. We don't have to, we can just like literally cut and paste. We think that the way they've set up auras with Gastromancy in the halfling list, it works. So why reinvent the wheel? Just do it that way. And so that's been, we used it last year, and this is the second year that we've done that. And I think it's going to be great.
Well, that FAQ kind of style thing, Rob, is that having your pack even from the start, most of the time these will have a points value, but directly addressed straight up. Do they count to attrition? Do they not? For if attrition's relevant in your tournament,
100%.
Because the question
100%.
is going to be asked.
Yeah, because essentially most of these special characters are going to be free, but they still have a cost, right? And so if they die, what's the cost? Some people will have, maybe there's a scenario point if you lose it or kill the other person's special character, right? But then in addition to, if you have a scoring system that's using attrition and or kill points, well, then this character should be part of it. It's not just 2,300. It's 2,300 plus the cost of the special character that you're playing out of. And that also means that whatever your scoring breakdown has to take that into account, that potentially at that point, if you're talking a 100 point character, then you're really playing 2,400 points, right?
Exactly. And that's another good reason to start from a common stat profile, because it's much easier to start them as the same cost as each other. Otherwise, that kind of how does this interact with the game all really start to break down a lot more. And it's another thing you could have got wrong. So this combination of special rules really is far more powerful, but you've only made it 20 points different. Yeah. I think kind of that commonality in base profile allows you to have them with essentially the same or similar points, which I think is pretty important.
And you can keep the points the same next year. And if one is undercosted, then you just take away stuff, right? Or if it's costing too much for what you give it, then maybe you give it if you had heal 2, maybe you give it heal 3, right? Like you just bump things up a little bit to make it sweeten the pot a little bit.
Yeah. And I think considering when you mentioned that FAQ kind of thing, Rob, is that, I'm assuming when the barkskin thing came up, you were kind of like, well, Trident Realms is basically the only thing that takes it with the command dice anyway. So, is it that big a deal if something like Trident Realms gets 2? Not that many people have been taking Trident Realms, so you might go, that's probably
and out of like almost 30 players, I think it's only being taken like 8 times or something, like 6 times, the Minstrels of Mail, right? And it might not be taken for that, right? They might prefer, it's got heal 4. That might be the reason they like it. It's also got stealthy, spell ward. Both things that are great in the Southeast. And it's got Phalanx. Phalanx, is situational, but in the right situation, it can be devastating. Oh, I have an ensnare unit, and now I give it Phalanx too. Again, Trident Realms, ensnare horde. Let's pop Phalanx for a turn. Okay.
Yeah,
like
and that's
that.
where things like your Strider Aura might be more problematic too, right? Someone like Halflings can already access one, then you've got another option, and now you've got Strider Aura basically that covers the whole board.
I'm already looking at this going, half the event is using the one character. So, what do I do? Well, he's got Bane Chant 2 and Lightning Bolt. Bane Chant 2 is problematic in the sense that really everybody can use that spell. It's like so utilitarian. Like everybody will find a use if it's in the list. So it kind of like if you're even on the fence for something else in his profile, this just makes it a no-brainer, right? And the Strider Aura probably goes away and becomes something else next year. Because there's so many units that already have Strider, right? And remember, this is Strider Aura. So, and you're on a 40 millimeter base. So you could be giving Strider to 3 or 4 people, right? Or 3 or 4 units. Now only once per turn, and you still have to roll for it. So maybe that doesn't go off. But I'm going to be interested to get the player feedback. And,
did you say you limited it to once per turn, but then only once per game they could cast it?
Yeah. So that you can cast, you are allowed to attempt each aura once per game.
Yeah,
and you can only cast
a great way to
one
limit
aura.
The power impact too, right?
Yeah, you can only right, and you can't stack the auras. You can do one aura per turn, but really that's only 3 out of 6 turns or 3 out of 7 turns. So it does limit, right? But if you think about the game, there's always that point where when the Strider Aura is needed, right? Or the Wild Charge +1 on the Troubadour tempo. Like there's probably that Northern Alliance army, which is what it looks like is in love with that. That hey +1 because he's already got +1 Wild Charge and some stuff, right? So it all stacks, right? And I think last year he was never taken, and I think it was Wild Charge 1. And so he's, what? Come on, we'll just add the +1 to let it stack. And unfortunately for them, it's still the least used bard out of all of them. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I reckon it's probably the Bane Chant that makes him the most popular. The
bard, the battle bard, yeah. And I thought about, well, okay, so we're trying to give them 2 to 3 spells, right? Well, if we take Bane Chant away, what do we replace it with? What other? I mean, we can give him Fireball, I guess, right? That could be something, I suppose, because it's about doing damage, right? And obviously, Lightning Bolt is kind of on the nose for that. And then Bane Chant, you're making your own units. You're increasing their damage potential, right? Or their damage output. So it's going to be a thing. Or maybe Matt, I just say you get Bane Chant 1. You got a 50-50 chance, baby, right? Yes, it's there, but because with Bane Chant 2, what is it, 66% chance? So it's more likely than not that you're going to get it off.
I think a point that brings up is I would argue it's harder to balance the impact of spells versus the special rules you might give it. So, like, I think those combination of spells, because it's in the way the game's built already, there's more variation in how armies access spells in terms of the volume they can access it in. So I think in spells versus special rules, you're probably more likely to hit some issues that you hadn't considered.
And that's why we try to be cautious about it. And anything that gets improved, it's a minor improvement, right? And when we nerf it, it's a minor nerf. And we just, unless we really screw up and we give it +1 speed, which was not, it was not, I mean, it was very situational, but in a couple of those situations, it was devastating, right? Like when you stack it and, because I mean, that's +2 on the +2 speed on the charge, right? It's pretty powerful stuff. So yeah, the tricky part is, the other piece of this is that we were touching on this. It's a hobby thing too, right? You're hopefully incentivizing people to make something cool, hopefully matches their army, but also they're making their own memento from the event. Realistically, one interesting thing about our event is you can only win best painted once with a specific army. You have to bring a new army to win it. And the same thing with the bard. If you bring the same bard, you can't win the best bard. So there's an incentive to bring new, right? And so hopefully this encourages them to do that. Other than Brian Trahan, yes, I'm calling you out. Everybody else is building new bards for the most part.
And like a lot of it comes down to also, are you, like we said this basically in the meta bit, but are you trying to influence list building or not? So you mentioned, Rob, that they used to be inspiring, but you've taken that away. I think sometimes having them inspiring can be good because then someone doesn't have to take necessarily an extra. So you might see a little bit more diversity in lists for people not having to pay, a character tax for inspiring or something like that. So, it again, that'll come back to, what are your goals of the character in general, or even if that's not a goal, you do have to consider that things like that will adjust how people build their lists.
All of our bards have nimble and stealthy. So at the end of the event, we're always going to ask, how well do they survive? Were they ever in peril? And if they're not in peril, well, then maybe we lose the stealthy, right? Like just to give them a little bit of weakness. You go ahead and shoot those guys. The nimble piece, maybe that is potentially a way to make the spells better than they should be because you're nimble. So now you have 2 pivots with speed 5. You can maybe get your auras and your spells to a spot easier than if you didn't have nimble, maybe. Right. So yeah, we're always looking at it and, we'll take feedback just like with the bonuses that we put on the scenarios, at the end of the event, we'll get feedback from people. And we actually, another good idea for people, run a test event. So we just did a 1-day called the Bard Room Brawl. Again, I like alliteration, in terms of play on words of things that have come in the past. And we just did a 1-day event. We did 2 things with it. One is we gave people the chance to play 3 of the scenarios that we were going to play at the event, kick the tires. I've made some adjustments to the bonuses specifically for those scenarios. But also we told them, hey, bring your list, but you can play with any bard you want every game. Because in our event, you have to pick a bard and you have to stick with it for 5 games. But at this 1 day, we're like, hey, try them all out. That's fine. And, and then we did get some feedback. Now, to be fair, scenarios we can change because they don't know. No, we didn't post that, right? So that's not public knowledge. But we can't change the bards before the event, right? That's not something, even if they give me feedback, I can't fix that until at the end because it's not fair. Obviously, people have already turned in their list and stuff. So. But it's good. It's good to get feedback for future events, right?
Yeah, and that's probably another important point, Rob. Is like if you haven't had time to run a test event or something, don't assume or feel like you're 100% chance that you've got it right. You got to be open to. You got to be.
Yeah, you're never going to get it right the first time. But this is our 5th event. They have changed a lot. Now, I would say the change from last year to this year was minor tweaks. Think of it, you're piloting a battleship. You don't make big swings. Let the ship slowly drift a little bit to the left or the right, see where you are, and then make a new assessment. So, yeah, don't make big corrections. I have made a lot of mistakes over the years with that. Individual was one. Like, especially when they were on a bigger base. Or even when they weren't on a bigger base, it's like, well, I gave them individual, but then I gave them unit strength. It's like, well, how does that work? I, as a rule, do not want to have to write an FAQ for these characters. These characters that, as we have today, are self-explanatory. The only question they had was, hey, you have a unique spell in there with bark skin. It doesn't count towards that that limit. So we're letting them do that. But that was the only thing in there that people had questions of, which was great.
And then I think another thing to consider, Rob, is, are you going to make them all buff, or is there a little bit of fluff in there as well? So, is it all about boosting, or do you have a little bit of positive and negative? And again, I mean, my belief is, one, it comes down to what you want to do with the rules. If you want to have more powerful rules, then it's probably better to have something that takes them away, takes a little bit away, or because you're less likely to balance it well. Or it's probably more a question of, back to that, what are you trying to achieve with the character? What do you think there?
100%. And I go to the Blue City Brawl. The guys are running a really fun event now. When I stopped running it, they obviously stopped using the king. They started to make versions of themselves. And if you know them, they have a collection of miscreants, right? So they have people that like negatively affect dice, or might impact yourself. They're not necessarily it's almost like a gamble. You put this thing on the field and maybe it's going to help you, maybe it's not going to help you. And I think that's where the interest is really, and maybe that's one of the things we need to look at our bards, is that maybe there is a negative that can occasionally, you think back to Warhammer, right? The old magic system in like 8th edition, I actually may have started in 6th, but I loved it, right? The more dice you threw, the better chance you are to get it off. But also it increases the possibility of a dimensional cascade where you roll double one and you might lose the wizard, right? And I think there should be risk and some reward, right? Tied together.
Well, yeah. I mean, another option with something like your bards would have been to play on the bards being specific people from the music scene. But then, if they were in the same era and hated each other or something, does one get a bonus against,
does one get drunk and they're out of the game? Yeah. Does the Elvis version sit on the toilet and die? I don't know. You got me thinking about it. Like, maybe there is something about, to do the aura, they really have to kick back a beer, and maybe there's a potential on a one, they get drunk and they don't do anything. It's for sure. There's ways, because what we're really talking about is that we play a very deterministic game. I know we have dice variants, but like, other than that, it's certainly not like some other games, right? The narrative piece, the lore piece, I think can really be enhanced by adding a little bit of randomness, a little bit of goofiness, because ultimately, to your point we were talking about before about these characters, whatever characters you have, you've got a few of them. If they're very deterministic, like they know that X, Y, and Z is always going to happen, well then, and maybe segue here. I mean, maybe there's more probability, like the stronger bards, air quote, have more wackiness in the probability in which they are successful in their auras, right? Interesting.
Yeah, and so for our rising characters, like we had the two from last year, one of which I didn't create, they have plays on the fact that a couple of years before there was like clock issues around timings of games and planes to catch. So, and we always had joked that, Stephen got the hardest done by because he was so planning. He'd practiced so much to the clock. And so he had a special rule of robbed, and to make up for prior injustices while the devilfish is alive, you get 5 extra minutes on your clock. But then once he's gone, the 5 minutes disappears. So,
oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah. That's super cool. Yeah. But super immersive too, right? Like it's really making you feel about the impact that it's having, and their presence or lack of presence, right, when they're routed, really affects that. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've discussed a fair bit. I mean, we've alluded to it a fair bit, is that if you're going to have multiple options, the idea is to make them equally desirable across the board. You don't want to, and you won't. I mean, I think it'd be hard pressed to say that I don't think you would say that you've got it wrong with this event, Rob, because it's like you said, it's still only half. It's not like 90% of the field are taking one.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's close. It's close.
The Blue City Brawl guys do it interestingly. They have like 4 or 5 different brawlers they can take. The one that gets taken the most isn't available the next year. They just literally come off the list, right? And then it forces you to take one of the other ones. So yeah, I mean, however you do it, I like the fact though that, you know, if you're going to have multiples, my preference is to give people sort of a menu. You know, you build a sort of a type of army, and then you can either one of two things. You can either enhance what your army's already doing, or you can mitigate a gap. Like, okay, I have a very hitty army, then I can take the Balladeer Bard, and that makes me more hitty. I got extra main chan, I'm Strider, I'm Fury, I'm elite in melee. Cool. Or maybe they're weak to some shooting. Well, then maybe I'll take the Minstrel, of Mail and get, you know, Stealthy and Spell Ward and Phalanx. Oh, and by the way, Barkskin and Heal, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, what I really love about your characters is that the best mitigation of the power is to limit how frequently they can use it. So if you want to put something more powerful in, I mean, you've got two avenues to that, I guess. It's the attempt by having that Gastromancy rule, but then the only once per game. So
you could try to cast it, but it might not go off. As opposed to true Gastromancy, you can try to cast it every single turn. You can do it once,
and you could vary that even more. Like if you had a 1-day event, say that only had 3 games, the other option is kind of go, you can only use one of them per tournament, you know, but you could use it every turn or something, do you know, or more turns. Like there's multiple ways that you can go about it. You've just got to consider, it's always about what are the consequences of the change.
I think the big thing too, though, is to make sure you're incentivizing people on the hobby side. So you have this cool rule that's great at enhancing their army, but try to get them a reason to make something cool. Because that, when people look at our event, you know, I mean, it probably looks a lot like, I mean, we got really cool terrain, but like the armies themselves, you know, it's probably very similar to what we have at a lot of events. But the bards, you know, people come there, what is that? Because like, you know, I got an ogre army and here's this little guy playing like a goblin playing the drums or something. It's like, well, what is that? And it's sort of, it gives a little bit of a visual separation from what you would typically see at an event. So, and it makes people think out of the box, right? Because, you know, to be fair, if you're Travis Tim of the world, you're looking at these bards, you're like, what can you rub your hands together? What can I do to exploit them in a fantastic way? Right. And, you know, and to be fair, I have put stuff in front of him that took him like 30 seconds to go, that's not going to work. And here's why. I think we had like elite without melee. He's like, can I just take my war engine spam and like, have elite for shooting on like 9 war engines for goblins, right? I was like, okay. You don't even have to persuade me on that one. I'll just fix it before I even.
On top of things like then probably popping a couple of wingets in as well. Right?
Correct.
So
right. Yeah. Like, okay, that's probably the wrong answer there.
Yeah.
So the thing is just know you're going to make mistakes the first time you do it. So I always tell people, if you're doing it for the first time, be conservative. Don't swing for the fences. Maybe you just start with 1 or 2 versions, but they're very limited, and you slowly incrementally move the needle to where they're just making an impact, but they're not overbearing, right? And so that you have some controls in place to help you, you know, because if you do swing too far, that's gonna, if it really negatively impacts the game for someone, because, oh my God, I lost this game because of XYZ of the other player had this special crazy character. That's not what you want. What you want is people to go, I remember that game. That's the time that your bard charged my bard in the dominate circle to get the bonus, and there was this epic duel off. You know what I mean? Like, you want the stories to come out of it. Not that, oh, well, technically I got the Fury aura off and that destroyed you. Like, that's not the story. But there should be something that comes out of it that really is the memories that we make. I mean, you made a cool model. That's something, right? You have a visual representation of what you did for the army, but then or for the event. And then in addition, maybe that cool model can do something and be, well, I mean, at the end of the day, we're making heroes, right? That's what we're doing here, right? Typically we're making something that should inspire people. No pun intended, right? Just
yeah, 100%. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything there. So I hopefully it gave them a lot to think about if they're thinking of creating characters for their tournaments, or maybe they hadn't considered it before, or maybe it'll make them consider it. But I think there's plenty to mull on when you are creating one, that's for sure. And I would definitely advocate for running it past people before you publish them.
Don't do that. And I've done that before. I'm like, oh, I know what I'm doing. No. Same thing with scenarios and stuff. You're making custom stuff. Don't do anything that changes the base rules without checking in with people, right? Because number one, some people don't want to go to events that have a lot of crazy wonkiness, right? They want like pretty clean out of the book. And so what I'm saying is what you do could affect who actually wants to show up to your event, which is the opposite of what you want. You want to make tweaks that make people go, oh, that's an interesting way to play. Like another thing about our event, we have crazy point limits. Like ours is 2020, right? Because it's tied to, like, I've been running this thing where I'm tied to when books are released, right? And so 2020, that's just a really weird amount of points. And I get all those kind of questions like, Rob, you're really pissing me off because this is very difficult to make a list at 2020. Because like if it's 1995, maybe there's a list, or if it's 2023, 2300, like they have a list. But I'm like, they've never played an event at 2020, and we have Command Dice, right? And we obviously don't have allies. We're not playing with Withdraw. We're probably the first tournament in the United States to not use Withdraw. So again, I'm just trying to mix it up a little bit and, see people. I want people to see playing the game a little bit differently. And the bards enter that. And, I'll toot our horn. The bards do really make it feel like Memphis. And we have a rich musical background. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, B.B. King, Isaac Hayes, Justin Timberlake, born here in Memphis, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot going on, right? Even if you're into the Christian rock, right? Skillet's from here. So, it's a lot of music. And so, yeah, find whatever you're trying, what the identity of your event is, and see if you can find a special character to really turn it to 11, as the Spinal Tap guys would say.
Yeah. And just don't go too hard so that you make people feel like they've walked through.
Don't go to 12. Go to 12. That's too far. Don't go to 12. Stay at 11.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we can start to wrap up there. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, join our group, the Countercharge Podcast. Have a look for us on YouTube. We've got a little bit more content coming out. The podcast, of course, also available on YouTube now. So, like and subscribe, and share our episodes where you have liked them. That all helps make it more accessible to other people. Do you have anything else to add, Rob, before we close it out?
I mean, I think you said it best. I mean, this podcast is all about communal creation of the community, right? Like, we're trying to facilitate building something great, and any way you guys can contribute to that cause, we're all about it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.